And welcome once again to Living in the 21st Century. Joining me today is Robert Nichols from Boston Trust Realty Group. Robert, it's a pleasure to have you on.
Thanks for having me, Earl.
Sure. There's a lot going on in the real estate world, but first I want to tell you about my experience. Recently, over the past couple of months, I found that my property value dropped by like 5%, and then quickly thereafter it bumped back up like 3%. What would really cause such a quick fluctuation and drop or increase in values?
So that's a great question, Earl, and we're seeing that across the market. You know, as we know, the real estate market is rate sensitive, interest rate sensitive. So when rates spiked, you know, it was a shock to the market initially. We went from rates in the 2s and 3s to rates in the 6s and 7s within a 12-month period. And people just weren't ready for it. And as that transition occurred, you know, it really just brought the market to a halt. But as, you know, folks kind of got used to the new normal of rates being a little bit higher in the, 6%, 7% range, and then they kind of came back down to the low 6s, you saw the activity really pick up. And the one factor that's really been supporting values are all, so you saw that 5% drop and then a 3% gain, is the fact that there is still a lack of inventory out there. There aren't a ton of homes available. So buyers who are looking to purchase homes are forced to cope with, these higher prices than they want to pay and these higher rates. But values have dropped a little bit, which makes it a little bit easier for folks to kind of continue to re-engage and buy homes.
Okay, great. Before I touch on this subject, gentrification and capitalism, I want to look at the fast or the scarcity, basically, of the turnover of sales in the real estate market. Could you see that basically contributing to this fluctuation of rapid and decreased sales in this market? One of the things I've recognized is that a lot of people are not, especially kids, are actually, who would have purchased homes, are trying now to sell their homes, moving back in with their parents, paying them a little rent, and living with their parents. Do you think all of this under one umbrella could be a future thing to look forward to as the real estate market progress or not progress?
So, Raw, I'll tell you, there's a lot of factors that are leading to that, but it all starts and ends with affordability. And what we're seeing in cities like Boston, for example, the housing stock is older. We have a lot of 3 families, which include 3 bedrooms and 4-bedroom apartments. But that demographic in Boston has changed. And as a result of that, we need the city to really incentivize developers to build micro units, studios, 1-beds. You have a lot of vacant parcels throughout the city that could be developed into housing that meets the needs of today's demographic. But what happens on the flip side is, because you don't have that, I call it the shacking up model or the Friends model from the TV show Friends. When folks just get together, they rent a 3-bedroom apartment, everyone's paying $1,000 a room or $1,500 a room. And that rent for that one apartment that normally would be, let's say in a normal market, $2,500, $2,700 is now $3,500 or $3,300, because you have young professionals, all who can afford to spend more, and there isn't anywhere else for them to go, kind of shacking up in these units and jacking up rents. Now, if there are single families, 1-bedrooms and studios developed that allow for these folks to move into those apartments and have their independence at a lower price point, maybe let's say, I don't know, $1,200 or $1,500, it'll free up a lot of the existing homes that are here in the city and allow families now to be able to afford some of those units as, more housing is added. But the development process is so slow that it's a losing battle. So that's one factor that's really driving a lot of folks to either move back home or because they can't rent. And then on the buy side, with that, jump in rates, the cost to buy a home obviously significantly increased, which led to a lot of folks saying, you know what, I'm going to put my hands in the air and I'm going to wait for things to soften a little bit as rates do come down. And then as sellers also get more realistic on the new normal, which is a decrease in pricing, which we haven't seen in quite a while. But affordability is really a real issue out here that, there's a lot of pressure on both the rental markets and the sales market, which is causing a lot of folks, between the ages of 25 to 40 to move back home and figure things out and try to save money until a brighter day comes, hopefully, when they can afford to get a place of their own.
What does this spell for families in the future? Are we going to see a seriously decrease in family production where people getting married and having more kids and raising a family together, or you're going to now have a young generation growing up stating, well, you know what? It's just not worth it to raise a family because I can't rent and afford to raise a family. I have to get my own home. How am I going to do that if the income we are earning is so small, the mortgages rates are so high, and all these kind of things? Do you see this can have a negative impact on how we see a decrease in the American population in years to come, which in turn will have an adverse effect on real estate?
So, Errol, I really believe we're already seeing that happen, actually. So it's a great point you bring up. But if you look at birth rates, they decline. I know we had a spike during COVID. A lot of these COVID babies, it was different times. Folks were home with nothing to do. So we know what that leads to.
Right.
But with that said, a lot of young families, a lot of folks I know, a lot of my friends, I have 4 children. And I'm like, I'm one of a kind out here. People are like, you're crazy to have that many kids in this environment because it is expensive. It requires a lot more energy, time, and hard work to provide for my family. And I do see a lot of young people, folks in my age group and younger, saying, you know what, I'm going to have one child. I may not have any children. So, yeah, no, it's a real thing. And we are seeing it. And I think, I won't say it necessarily will hurt the real estate market. I think it just means we have to understand that there is a shift in the demographic and we have to provide housing that meets that need. Whether it's retrofitting a 3-family into 6 units or 1-beds, or building, more housing that meets that need, developers are creative and they're always trending and tracking what's happening in the market. And so as a result of that, I think the real estate market and the folks who are in the game are going to obviously adjust their strategies to meet the needs of the marketplace.
Nice. One of the questions I want to look at seriously today is gentrification and capitalism. And also want to take a look at rates for certain minority classes are different to some in other classes or other folks. But I want to look first at gentrification because we recognize over the past 2 decades, basically, that there is a consistent move where you find that one class of people who are in a specific geographical location were taxed higher, and it's not necessarily meaning that their communities are more prestige than the other and they should carry higher tax rates than the other, but it's because of a certain class of people and a certain elite class want to get in. They have probably their powers in governmental places, especially local government, where they seek to penetrate that specific market so they can start another class based on its geographical location. What's your intake or outlook as a professional in this field when it comes to be, I don't want to use the word purging a certain society or a certain community because they want to have a certain caliber of people in, but how do you see this playing out in the future? Because it's something that actually happening. And it's happening even more in Boston than anywhere else, but it's happening.
Yeah, Earl, so it's a real thing. The demographics are shifting, the classes are shifting, the folks who come into a different neighborhood, obviously a lot of folks can't afford to stay in the neighborhoods they grew up in. And it is a tragedy, right? It's something that is, I think, overall negative in a lot of the communities that my company serves and that I grew up in and work in every day. But I think the real issue, and I think it's a hard solution, it's not a simple fix, is financial literacy. I know growing up in the inner city as a kid, I didn't have much coming up. My father was a union electrician. My mom was early childhood education. I felt trapped, they're all right. I felt like, what's next for me? And I was fortunate that my father really made sure I was going to go to college, and I had a lot of support from my family and from my network to be the first in my immediate family to graduate from college. But to me, it comes down to, first and foremost, financial literacy, education, so that folks begin to feel more empowered, that they can understand how to navigate these changes and get jobs where they're able to take advantage of the improvements in the neighborhood. I mean, I think the one thing you'll see is when you're buying a house in a neighborhood, for example, just take Dorchester. You're buying a 3-family for $1 million from a family that, let's say, owned it I sold one of these a few months back since the 1960s, right? They had no mortgage on the property. This was a black family. They lived in that house many years. Then they rented it out and they sold it. They made $1 million. They still stayed in the community, but now the buyer who bought it was an investor, and he's going to renovate the house and do all this work. And he's not selling to condos, but now they were charging $1,700 a month in rent. But because he had to pay $1 million for it, in order to carry that mortgage, he's going to have to charge $3,000 a month in rent. So it's not, I think, intentional, but it's just a function of the market. But I think in order for folks to be empowered, it really comes down to making sure, there's education out there, there's tools out there to really educate people from these communities so that they can take advantage of owning real estate. And in some cases, or maybe not sell to begin with, but refinance, pull out that money and maybe invest it elsewhere. But, it is a real thing. We're seeing it every day. And I really don't have an answer to it relative to, what folks can do other than really, don't sell if you don't have to. That's really one of the big things I preach. Learn how to leverage the assets you and your family own in order to keep it for multiple generations. And then if you're someone who gets caught up, like I have a friend of mine, he's one of my subcontractors who does hardwood flooring and he does some other stuff. His rent spiked to $5,000, man. He couldn't afford it. So he ended up having to move to New Hampshire. And, for him, he's like, it's a little bit more of an inconvenience, but he actually has a better quality of life because he was able to relocate to a neighborhood where it's more affordable, a little bit more space. He's getting a bigger home for less money. So I think it's just, from an individual level, folks have to really figure out how they're going to navigate. And it may require a longer commute, which sometimes can be tough, but it's hard, man. It's a complex issue that is going to require a lot of different strategies to help really empower folks to be able to stay where they are.
You're right about that. The language of real estate, and if you're lacking financial literacy, it's a big possibility that your daily life, being so busy, will not enable you to understand what's really going on. And that brings me now to capitalism. I think real estate is one of the biggest organizations that can define capitalism in its best way. And when I say that is that the poor minority see this as gentrification, right? The communities getting purged and the other superior class moving in, or it's upgrading that it just bringing a certain elite few within that community and they are all out. Now, that's how they perceive it. The businessman see capitalism, here's the opportunity. And like, for example, I'm going to use me as an example. There are several real estate agencies that hounding me down every single day, or investors rather, to buy my property. Now, I know they have my property on the market for one thing. Now, for me, I don't even see what the market is really saying. I know my community. I know what you are buying if you want to buy my house. It's more than just buying a house. I am placed in the middle of a city, and all the convenience you could think about, from transportation to fire service to the mayor's office to the police station. I mean, you name it. The hospital, walking distance. I can take 2 minutes and get to the hospital by walking. When I see all of this and take this into consideration, you can't put really a market price and say, well, as an investor, I'm going to give you what the market's worth. No. You got to buy. You're buying something else different. And I understand they got to make money and so forth. But for the average person who just struggling every day, the mortgage may be done paid for, some may not. But they just don't have the time to sit down and make cautious, analytical decisions that would enable to maximize on what they have as value. And that's a thing in real estate. People must understand its environment. It's more than just the house you're living in or what condition the house may be in, but it's the environment. If you're going to raise taxes on a house or a certain community, it's either that some big expensive building or development next door goes up. I mean, something that could be bad too, because it can also depress the sales on your house, because next door community has just built up and it looks beautiful and so forth. And even if you force to invest money to bring your house up to date, it doesn't necessarily mean that it's going to raise your value either. You may more waste money by injecting it in to bring it up to par, but the modern community is next to you saying a different story. So how could you try to, so what kind of advice would you want to give a person like that who has a home, maybe within a certain community, they want to inject capital in it and bring their house up to par? It looks good, but at the end of the day, it doesn't really increase the value of the house. How would you, that's a whole mouthful, would you care to comment on that?
No problem at all. Yeah, no. So what I would say is, first and foremost, if you have a property and you're sitting on equity, you want to and you want to tap into it and leverage it to the maximum. I believe that the best way to do that would be to get a home equity line of credit. That'd be the first thing I'd look at. But more importantly, your exit strategy. So if you get this money, let's say you get an infusion of $100,000 or $200,000 that you have on a home equity line of credit. The next question is, where can you put that money to get the highest and best return based on your risk tolerance? And so to your point, sometimes that is not in doing any kind of improvements at your home, because yes, you may make the home a little bit more attractive, but you're always going to be capped on value based on the market. And so with that said, if you want to make improvements to improve your quality of life, that's one thing. But if you want to make improvements or take that money and turn it into something that will yield a higher return or increase your monthly cash flow, that's really what you need to speak to a professional. You know, those are the types of situations where I'd be happy to speak with someone, really look at their situation, look at how much equity they can potentially tap into, because you can only typically go up to 70 to 75% of your total home's value on a cash out refi or home equity line of credit. And I don't say cash out because a lot of folks are locked in at low rates. So you don't want to refi all your debt. Let's just make that clear.
Right.
But however you do tap into your equity, and there are some other options I can also discuss with folks, you want to make sure that you know what options are available to you, whether it's buying another investment, whether it's investing in a real estate fund, whether it's investing in some kind of bonds or yield, high yield accounts right now. With rates going up, there are a lot more financial instruments out there where you can make passive income on a monthly basis that could lead to increased cash flow. And now you have more money in the future to do other things with. But I would say you really want to talk to a professional first to get an idea of what your home's value cap is, and then look at your goals, whether it's improving your home for your own personal use and enjoyment, or if it's I want to build wealth and have passive income. That'll really dictate what decisions you ultimately make in regards to your property.
Yeah, I like that. But one thing I want to ask you, let's say, for example, your house have quite a bit of equity in it. Let's say probably 60 to 70% of equity inside of it. Your mortgage is approaching end time, about to be paid off in a couple of years. Let's say you take 70% of your equity in the house and reinvest into buying probably a next property or a multifamily property for investment or whatever the case may be. Will that put you in a position where you are now back at square one, where you now owe a fresh loan for both properties? Or does it make your equity far superior in terms that the new multifamily house you would have just invested in is worth ever so much, and it's a way above the mortgage or line of credit that you would have just got to buy that home with? Where does that put you? Would it put you at a better advantage?
It depends. And I'm glad you asked this question, because it's three dimensions. The first dimension is looking at it from the perspective of, one, if you take money out of one asset to acquire another asset, you are going to build wealth. Yes. And wealth, obviously, you have these assets, they appreciate over time. So that's dimension one. But appreciation alone does not pay the bills. Right. That's a famous quote from one of my friends. We always talk, so number two is what their monthly cash flow looks like. So now that you've leveraged one property to pull out money and buy another, you need to make sure that, secondly, you are getting enough cash flow to justify the investment to feel comfortable. So if you wanted to make, 1,500 or 2,000 additional a month, you want to make sure that that investment yields the right return. And then number three, as well, you obviously have to make sure that whatever that monthly return is on that money or whatever you're making is, that your returns, your 2,000 a month or 1,500 a month, whatever you're making, is greater than the cost of the money you borrowed. So if if you have to pay a mortgage on the new loan and the new line you got on your existing property, you just want to make sure that that covers that expense with a profit on top of it. And that's really the key. So those three dimensions, you're building wealth, number one, looking at your cash flow and ensuring that cash flow covers all of the debt that you have and leaves you with a profit.
Excellent. Spoken like a true master. Tell me this. I hear on several occasions there are young people, and I'm really surprised at the amount of young people who are interested in acquiring a home. They want to start investment from early, getting their own homes and start to settle down and get ahead with life. What are some of the what are the kind of advice you would give them at this point? They are still premature in what the decision they're making. They need to go to first-time home buyers course and get some understanding of what's going on. But as a seasoned real estate owner, how would you advise that young person of making that first leap to go and purchase a home?
So, Aral, I've been through it. I was a first-time home buyer at one point myself, and I always tell folks the same thing. And again, not everyone has the appetite for this, but I always recommend buying your first home, making sure that first home, when you buy your first home, making sure it's a multifamily, whether it's a 2-unit or 3-unit, is really up to you. A lot of folks get very nervous at the thought of becoming a landlord. And so for folks like that, I say, start with 2 units. But more importantly, one, that multifamily will offset your mortgage payment, right? It helps having that extra tenant in there, that extra income coming in. And two, it's not as hard to manage because you live there. And typically, when tenants live next to the landlord or above or below the landlord, they're usually on the best behavior. So, and that's what making sure you really vet and screen your tenants comes in, and really having a process to that. My team, we do a lot of rentals, so we can help with that. But that's my recommendation. And then as far as how to finance it, the good news is that the market is built to really support first-time home buyers. So you have FHA loans, which require only 3.5% down. You have mass housing loans here in Massachusetts and other agencies throughout the country that allow folks to get in with just 3% down. It's even less. And they'll also have some rehab components to both of those loans. So I recommend leveraging that because there's very little out of pocket to get in and start building wealth. And then lastly, with a first-time home buyer loan with FHA or mass housing or any of these other agencies, you can buy up to 4 units. So again, it really depends on your appetite for being a landlord. I know a lot of folks want to buy the single family first, but it's a lot easier to buy the single second and leverage one of these tools as opposed to trying to buy a single family and then jump into the multifamily side. It's very hard to get qualified for a low down payment loan, one of these 3 to 3.5% loans, if you buy your single first. So that's why I always say you use it to buy your first multi. And then after you get that stabilized, 6 months, a year, 2 years, however long it takes, then you can look at buying your dream home, buying that single family home. And then when you rent the first multifamily now you have increased cash flow coming in. So if you were making $2,500 a unit with your neighbor and living for free, now that property, you're getting that $2,500 in your pocket. And that, one tenant's paying your mortgage, the other tenant's paying you a monthly passive income there. And then that helps offset your mortgage for your single family. So it's a lot to think about for a first time home buyer. But to really sum it up, I think one, they need to know they can buy with 3 to 3.5% down. I recommend buying a multi. If that doesn't work for you, buying a single family or condo is fine, but just make sure you can comfortably afford the payments based on your salary.
Great. For a young college graduate who just came out of college, obviously he has a steep school loan. He still wants to buy a home. Still need to get a home. He probably need to get a motor car. What kind of advice would you want to give him trying to balance out motor car, college, school loan, and acquiring that home?
I say first, number one, and this might not be what folks want to hear, but I'd say you better stay home with mom and pops. That's number one. Number two, get a great job and save as much as you can before you go out and invest in the car. And again, I'd probably get whatever car you want, get something reliable, something dependable, but don't go crazy. Try to keep your monthly car payment to a minimum so that, when you go to qualify for buying a home, your debt to income ratio is lower. The less debt you have, and if you can get a car and not have a loan on it at all, even better. And again, it's a short-term sacrifice for the long-term gain. So then once you're kind of living at home, you have a car with no car payment, something you can buy with, $2,000, $2,500 for a little bit. Now, when you stack enough for that first down payment for your home, you're obviously going to want to talk to a mortgage broker to get approved or a lender to get approved. And then lastly, you can now start looking for a home. And again, I'd recommend a multifamily, at least 2 or 3 units, because now that can offset that student debt. You can use, your income from the property to pay that down. You hopefully would have had a nice nest egg, a nice down payment saved and some additional reserve saved. And that's really my recommendation. Try to save as much as possible early on so that after you get your house, then if you want to get a nicer car, you got the asset, the property to pay for the vehicle, to pay your bills. And I'd say maybe look to buy a couple. Don't just get one, buy 2 or 3. And then from there, allow those assets to take care of paying your student debt, any car payments or anything like that, so that whatever earned